Alright guys, this is the French Revolution video. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to get it done in one or if I'm going to have to do two, so we'll see. This could be part one or this could be all of it. Essentially, if you have your notes, what I've done is I've had to synthesize a lot of this information to get it to fit in the 2 days that we have this week of virtual learning. So your notes has 3 sections on it: causes of the French Revolution, major events of the French Revolution, and Napoleon coming to power. So in the first part, day 1 of what we're going to cover in class is going to be the causes and the major events. And then on the second part of this week, we're going to cover Napoleon. So there's going to be a lot more that you're going to see on my slides. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to try to explain what is on your notes so that you guys can get that, understand it, and move forward with that. So when we look at the causes of the French Revolution, you have to understand what it was like for the people and kind of put yourself in their shoes. The people wanted the government to change, so you have to go back and look at, well, what was wrong with the government? Well, the leader at the time, his name was King Louis XVI, and the leaders before him, many of them were also King Louis, and they were absolute leaders. So what is absolutism? Well, the definition I have here for you says, the theory that ultimate power in the early centuries of modern Europe was vested in a hereditary monarch who claimed a God-given right to rule. So if you remember back to the Enlightenment, we talked about the divine right of kings. And that was that the kings believed that God had given them the right to rule and that their children are going to rule as well. So essentially, absolutism is there's one person in power, they have all the power, and people can't question it. So people aren't going to like that because they have no rights and no power in the government. And if you remember back to the Enlightenment, the ideas about what the government is and should be are changing, and that the people in power thought the people were there to serve them, and the ideas of the Enlightenment was that the government should actually serve the people. So the people's ideas about what government is changing. Then we move on to the Enlightenment. Many Enlightenment thinkers condemned the legal and social privileges enjoyed by aristocrats and called for a society in which all individuals were equal before the law. This concept is not new. We have talked about this before, and it's a theme in what we have discussed this entire year. If you go back to the Russian Revolution, there were 2 classes of people. You had the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Those 2 people were not equal. Those 2 groups were not equal. The bourgeoisie had many more rights, they had more money, and they had more power in the government. As a result, the proletariat wanted equality. We have discussed that. That should make sense to you. It is the same concept here. We just have different names. It's a different country. There's different groups with names, but the idea is the same. There is one group that doesn't have the same equal rights as the other, and they want equality. So you have, and we'll get to what those groups are actually called here in a minute. So you need to understand that the Enlightenment played a role, and it was the ideas of the Enlightenment that I just mentioned that are going to impact this. Where is my recorder? Alright, sorry, I had a little technical issue there. Alright, so when you look at the impact of the Enlightenment, basically the Enlightenment creates something. It creates a desire for change, and it builds in people a revolutionary mood. So, if you're wondering what it did, it made people want to revolt. It made them want change. It made them want to revolt. So that's what the Enlightenment did. The next cause are the 3 estates. And beside 3 estates, you need to put the class system of France. Excuse me. So the 3 estates were the class system in France. And you had the clergy, nobility, and everybody else. In the first estate, you have the clergy. The clergy are the people that run the church. They made up 1% of the population. The second estate was made up of the nobles. The nobles were like those aristocrats we just talked about. They're extremely wealthy people. They make up 2% of the population. And the third estate is everybody else, and they make up 97% of your population. Now, technically, this group is made up of 3 subgroups. If the easy way to think of it is like lower class, middle class, upper class, everybody else. So you had some people, not everybody was poor. You had some people that were of the upper poor class, some of the middle poor class, and some that were really poor, and they would have been the lower poor class. So the 3 estates were, go back up to the 3 estates and type in, it was not equal. Obviously, you should be able to understand which group, even though they had the highest population, they were the ones that were oppressed. They didn't have as many rights and things as the first 2 groups. We'll get back to this in just a second when we talk about some of the major events, all right? If you go back to the Enlightenment and you're remembering about the Enlightenment and you're going to apply that to what we just talked about with the estates, the first estate, they're not going to like the Enlightenment. Well, one reason is because it questions the Bible. Another reason is it's going to threaten their power in society. The second estate, they'll disapprove of it as well because that means they're going to lose power and money. So they're not going to like the Enlightenment. The third estate's going to love the Enlightenment because it's going to change the government. That's going to give them more power and be more beneficial to them. So you should be able to apply learned information to what we're learning right now, and that's what this slide does here. This next slide goes over all of the causes. If you guys understand, there's a few things I haven't talked about, and that's the weak monarchs. We're not going to talk about the financial difficulties. We're not going to talk about the American Revolution, which happened before this. We will eventually get to that after break. Mainly, we talked about the Age of Enlightenment and its impact. But there are other ones as well, and this picture here helps you with that. Again, there were economic problems. The king, who was King Louis XVI, was not a very strong ruler. His wife was Marie Antoinette. She was not a very good leader also. She had a gambling problem and just added on to the economic problems there. So here's a recap. We've gone over most of them, and I've at least talked about some of them. We got to remember that this equates a little bit to the Russian Revolution, and you guys should understand that and be able to at least remember it because I've taught you that. So, the Estates General was the type of government that what they called their government that ruled over the 3 estates. And essentially, what it was is you had the clergy, the nobles, and everybody else. Each estate had 1 vote. Now, if we go back to what we learned a little while ago about the Electoral College, each state has a certain number of votes based on its population. And if you thought that made sense, then you would think that the third estate would have more votes. Well, that's not the case here. So that means on any given issue or topic, there's only 3 votes. 1 from the first estate, 1 from the second estate, and 1 from the third estate. Well, the first and second estates would always outvote the third, which means the third estate, and remember, if we go back up to what we saw here, these 2 agreed, and this one was always the odd man out. So these 2, it would be a vote, the vote would be 2-1, and the first and second estate would always get what they wanted. Now, in your notes, what I need you to do, if you haven't done this already from being in class, I need you to add the tennis court oath above storming of the Bastille. So tennis court oath should be 1, storming of the Bastille should be 2, Great Fear should be 3, Declaration of Rights of Man should be 4, September Massacres 5, and Reign of Terror 6. So the tennis court oath, if we go back up here to the Estates General, so each estate gets 1 vote, and they normally would meet in their meeting hall. Well, what happens is the third estate gets upset with what's going on, so they create their own government that they call the National Assembly. Well, what happens is the other two estates are like, well, screw them. We're not going to let them in their meeting hall. So they go in and they lock the doors and, they don't let them into their meeting room. So the third estate's like, well, what are we going to do? And they said, well, there's this building across the street. Let's go there. We can just meet in there. It was an indoor tennis court. So what they do is they break the doors down. They go in, and as that new government, the National Assembly, they're going to meet and create a new constitution and a new government. So the revolution has started. And it started when the Third Estate broke away, created the National Assembly, and now they're writing their own constitution. So you should know that the Tennis Court Oath was when the Third Estate started writing their own constitution. You could argue that this would be like the Declaration of Independence for America. Like that would be that type of action where they're like, all right, we're done. We're breaking up. So what's going to happen is there's going to be this thing called the Great Fear. So the revolution's going to start. And then remember, we have this class battle between the upper class and the lower class. And the first and second estates versus the third estate. Well, what happens is the first and second estates, there are rumors going around that they're going to hire outlaws to terrorize peasants. Well, the peasants get a little proactive here, and instead of letting the nobles hire outlaws, they're like, well, we're going to take the attack to you. The problem with this is that the third estate didn't necessarily have weapons, and they needed weapons. So the only weapons they had is some of them had hunting muskets for hunting animals, but mainly it was just clubs and pitchforks. And you can see here they have makeshift spears and then this cannon. You're like, where the heck did they find a cannon? Well, what they did is the third estate, which is actually 2 and 3 should be flipped, but what they do is they actually storm the Bastille. And the Bastille used to be a prison, and now it's a makeshift armory. And an armory is where the French government was storing all of the weapons. Not all of them, but they were storing many weapons that the French army was supposed to be using. So what happens is the French citizens of the Third Estate go to the Bastille and they storm it. Now this is very symbolic, and what that means is there's a representation here of a larger thing that is abstract, not necessarily concrete. So the concrete thing is that the Third Estate took over the building. Well, what did the building represent? The building represented oppression. What that means is it represented that the government would throw people there that questioned what they were doing. So if you were a political dissenter, that means you're somebody that disagreed with what the government was doing and you told people about it, you would get thrown in the Bastille. So what the government, when this happened, it is a representation, it is a symbolic representation of the people overthrowing the government and taking their power. So the French actually still to this day celebrate Bastille Day. Bastille Day is July 14th of every year. All right. The French citizens, as a result, get weapons, and now they're able to defend themselves. If you go to YouTube and search up Tale of Two Cities, Storming of the Bastille, you'll be able to watch this video there, or you could just find it on my notes. This one here is the same thing, just to cool music. The next thing is the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The Declaration of Rights of Man is similar to the U.S. Declaration of Independence, with an addition to some rights, kind of like our Constitution. The Declaration of the Rights of Man is basically the French citizen saying, hey, we have rights and this is what we think they should be. Liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression, equal justice, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So it's very similar to our Declaration of Independence, which again was a breakup letter between us and Great Britain. Continuing, we have some things going on outside of France and inside of France. So basically, the revolution it's going on, and the countries surrounding France, this isn't in your notes, but it's important to understand, the countries surrounding France didn't want the news about the revolution to get out. They didn't want the people in their own countries to be like, whoa, what's happening? We want to do that too. So the leaders of the countries around France, especially Austria, because that's where the queen was from, they said, hey, put your king back in power. And the people are like, no, we're okay. So during the revolution, what the Third Estate did is they took all the aristocrats, the people from that Second Estate, and they threw them in jail. All right, and they were going to put them on trial, and if they were found guilty, they were going to cut their head off with the guillotine. So during the September massacres, what happened was there was a fear that those members of those aristocrats, those members of the Second Estate, were going to escape prison. Now, the logical thing to do would be to increase security, put them on trial sooner, but the people weren't thinking logically. They were thinking extremely. And the group of people leading this charge, they were called Jacobins. And the Jacobins were led by a guy by the name of Maximilien Robespierre. His last name was Robespierre. And so they were impatient, fearful, and acted violently. So essentially what the Third Estate people did is they broke in, or these extremists did, is they broke into the prison and murdered these aristocrats. And again, that was called the September massacres. King Louis gets put on trial, he gets found guilty, and they cut his head off, behead him with the guillotine. And at the end of all of this, so the French Revolution is at its highest point of murder, where you're basically getting everybody who is not for the revolution or not radical enough is basically being beheaded by the guillotine. And again, the guy leading that, his name is Maximilien Robespierre, and he has a group working underneath him called the Committee of Public Safety. All right, think of them like cops. Get it? COPS. They were supposed to protect the revolution. Well, that time period when all of this was happening was called the Reign of Terror. And basically, you would go on trial in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you were beheaded. And so basically, they would take this group of people, and you can see back here in the distance is the guillotine. They would take this group of people into the from the courthouse to the guillotine, and they would behead them one by one. All right, that is the Reign of Terror. Anyone against the revolution, not radical enough toward it, were sent to the guillotine. And it ends, please make sure you know that it ends when people are like, all right, this is getting pretty crazy. It ends when they behead Robespierre. So where this leads us is that we need a leader in charge in France that's going to unite everybody. And that leader is going to be Napoleon Bonaparte. So in the next video and in the last part of what we're going to discuss before break is going to be what Napoleon does when he comes to power. So that video will get posted for you. If you have any questions, you let me know.